He thought his life was perfect, an empire built from nothing, a stunning fiancée at his side, and the loyalty of those he trusted most. But one whispered warning shattered it all. In the quiet of his office, a young black employee leaned in and said only 6 chilling words, "There's a camera in your office." That was the moment everything began to unravel. The recordings revealed more than betrayal. They exposed a scheme so cold, so calculated, it nearly cost him everything. What started as love turned into a public humiliation that would shake the foundations of his world. The world knew Jonathan Hale as a billionaire genius, the kind of man who made headlines not just for his wealth, but for his daring vision. He had built his empire from a modest startup in his garage, transforming it into a global tech powerhouse. To the public, he was everything: charismatic, intelligent, and impossibly lucky. To those closest to him, he was a man who worked tirelessly, driven by a hunger for progress and an almost naive belief that love and loyalty could withstand the temptations of money and power. Beside him was Vivian, the fiancée everyone admired. Stunning, graceful, and well-spoken, she seemed to embody perfection. Magazines praised their fairy tale romance, calling her the heart to his empire. Jonathan had believed it too. For years he ignored whispers that she was more invested in appearances than affection. He convinced himself that her dazzling smile and the way she clung to him during galas was love, not performance. But life has a way of unraveling masks in the most unexpected places. The whispers began in the most unlikely voice, that of Naomi Carter, a young black woman who worked in his office as an assistant to one of the senior managers. She wasn't wealthy, nor did she have the kind of connections Vivian flaunted. Naomi was quiet, diligent, and often overlooked. While Vivian charmed cameras and Jonathan's investors, Naomi worked long hours in the shadows, filing reports, checking documents, and ensuring that the details others ignored never slipped through the cracks. It was Naomi who noticed things first. Subtle details. A pen shifted ever so slightly on Jonathan's desk. Papers moved, drawers left just ajar when she knew she had closed them. Most people would have dismissed it as carelessness, but Naomi was trained by life to notice things. Coming from a background where every mistake had consequences, she learned to survive by paying attention. She kept quiet at first, unwilling to accuse anyone. But one evening, as she stayed late to organize documents, she spotted a faint red light blinking in the corner of Jonathan's office bookshelf. Barely noticeable, hidden between books that hadn't been touched in years. At first, she brushed it off as some device indicator, but curiosity drove her closer. It wasn't part of Jonathan's system. She realized then it was a camera. Her heart raced. Why would someone plant a camera in the office of a billionaire? She debated telling her supervisor, but fear held her back. Cameras like that weren't just for curiosity. They were for sabotage, blackmail, or something far darker. Finally, after days of wrestling with the knowledge, Naomi did the unthinkable. She approached Jonathan directly. It was early morning, before meetings began, when she found him reviewing reports at his desk. She leaned close, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry its weight. "There's a camera in your office." Jonathan looked up, startled, almost amused at first. But the seriousness in Naomi's eyes froze him. That one sentence planted a seed of doubt so heavy it changed the course of everything. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt a loss of control. He prided himself on being aware of every detail in his empire. But the thought that someone had invaded his sanctuary, the very space where he conducted private calls, signed confidential deals, and trusted his instincts, was terrifying. He didn't say anything to Naomi then, only gave a curt nod. But that night, after everyone left, Jonathan returned to his office with a team of discreet security experts. What they uncovered made his stomach drop. Multiple cameras, not just one. Hidden in vents, light fixtures, even behind the clock on his wall. All transmitting, all recording. And when they traced the signals, the truth cut deeper than betrayal. The devices had been installed months ago, giving someone unprecedented access to his life, his company, his private thoughts. His first suspicion was corporate espionage, competitors trying to undercut him. But the reality was far more personal, far more humiliating. The trail led back not to a rival company, but to his own inner circle. He thought of Vivian, the woman who knew his schedules, who had access to his office when no one else did, who often insisted on checking in on him at work. The possibility seemed unthinkable. Yet, as evidence piled up, Jonathan's mind began to unravel the lies he had ignored for too long. Meanwhile, Naomi became a silent observer of the billionaire's unraveling world. She hadn't exposed the cameras for recognition or gain. She simply couldn't bear watching someone so blindly walk into danger. But her courage set into motion a chain of events she could never have predicted, ones that would thrust her from the shadows into the spotlight, standing against the very forces that wanted her silenced. Jonathan began watching the recordings himself, determined to uncover the truth. What he discovered in those tapes would not only shatter his trust in Vivian, but also reveal a plot so humiliating it threatened not just his reputation, but his entire empire. And it all began with Naomi's whisper. Jonathan Hale was not a man easily shaken. For years, he had faced billion-dollar lawsuits, aggressive competitors, and global economic downturns that would have crippled weaker men. Yet nothing had rattled him the way those cameras did. They weren't just devices, they were an invasion of his very soul. Every boardroom conversation, every late-night call, every vulnerable moment he thought belonged only to him. All of it had been stolen. Jonathan launched an internal investigation so discreet that only his most trusted security team knew the details. Each camera was cataloged, examined, and traced. What unsettled him most wasn't only how many cameras had been hidden, but how perfectly placed they were, like someone who understood not only his office layout, but his habits, his movements, his most vulnerable positions, and the deeper his team dug, the clearer the trail became. Whoever planted them had insider access. Jonathan's mind spun with possibilities. Trusted colleagues? Jealous competitors who bribed employees? But one name kept clawing back into his mind no matter how hard he pushed it away. Vivian, the woman who wore perfection like silk. Vivian, who knew how to charm his board members, who managed to sway investors with a laugh, who stood by his side in photographs as though she belonged to the empire he had built. He loved her once, believed in her once, but cracks had been appearing for months. Her unexplained absences, her sudden interest in his financial documents, her probing questions about his schedule. Jonathan ignored it all, until Naomi's whisper tore away the blindfold. Naomi's burden for Naomi Carter. Life didn't change overnight. She still came to the office early, typing reports, filing contracts, doing the work no one praised but everyone relied on. Yet she knew things were shifting behind closed doors. Jonathan was quieter, sharper, more deliberate in his movements. And when their eyes met, there was an unspoken acknowledgement. He trusted her in a way he didn't trust others anymore. That weight was heavy. Naomi hadn't meant to step into the middle of his world. She wasn't ambitious for power or recognition. She only wanted to do her job to survive. But now, she was no longer invisible. Late one evening, as she prepared to leave, she overheard voices drifting from the conference room. Jonathan's tone was low, controlled, but edged with steel as he spoke to his head of security. She caught fragments of words, signal traced. Insider access, compromised trust. Her stomach tightened. She hurried away before they noticed her lingering. Naomi didn't need the full picture to know danger was unfolding. Cameras weren't just tools for curiosity, they were weapons. Someone was gathering ammunition against Jonathan Hale, and sooner or later, those bullets would be fired. Jonathan didn't have to wait long for confirmation. His security chief returned with grim news. The recordings had been accessed remotely multiple times. Not by hackers in another country. Not by faceless competitors. The IP address tied back to a private device registered under a name Jonathan knew too well. Vivian. The room spun. The woman who shared his bed, who whispered promises of forever, had been watching him like prey. But Jonathan wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. He needed undeniable proof, something so irrefutable that when he confronted her, there would be no escape, no smooth lies to cover her tracks. So he let the cameras keep running. He let the betrayal breathe, festering, while his team quietly recorded every instance of Vivian accessing the files. It was agony, waiting. Pretending in public that nothing was wrong, smiling at Gallas while Vivian clung to his arm, all the while knowing she had invaded his most sacred space. But Jonathan had built his empire on patience and strategy. He would not move until the board was set in his favor. The recordings, when Jonathan finally reviewed some of the footage himself, the betrayal deepened. Vivian hadn't just planted cameras for curiosity. She had been sharing clips selectively with one of his fiercest rivals, a corporate shark who had tried for years to undercut Hale Industries. In one clip, Jonathan was negotiating a contract late at night. His private doubts, his hesitations, his vulnerable calculations, all laid bare. In another, he was on a personal call with his aging mother, confiding things he would never dare show to the public. Vivian had taken not just his business, but his humanity, and handed it over to someone who wanted him destroyed. Jonathan's rage simmered, but beneath it was heartbreak. He had ignored every red flag, blinded by her beauty and charm. And now she wasn't just a liar, she was a traitor. While Jonathan strategized, Naomi found herself caught in her own storm. She noticed Vivian entering the office at odd hours when Jonathan wasn't there. Sometimes Vivian claimed she was dropping off something, or waiting for Jonathan, but Naomi felt the lies drip from her tongue like poison. One afternoon, Naomi stumbled upon Vivian in Jonathan's office, pretending to tidy up his desk. But Vivian's hands weren't on papers. They were near one of the vents where a camera had been hidden. Naomi froze, her heart hammering. Vivian smiled at her, too sweet, too deliberate. "Oh, just helping Jonathan out," she said casually, before leaving. Naomi knew then that Jonathan's suspicions weren't paranoia, they were truth. Her instinct screamed at her to stay quiet, to protect herself. But something about Jonathan's vulnerability, the loneliness she had glimpsed in his eyes when she whispered about the camera, pushed her forward. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. Jonathan crafted a plan as meticulous as any corporate takeover. If Vivian wanted to watch, he would give her a performance she could never recover from. He set traps, staged conversations, deliberately misleading documents, controlled leaks. Every false move he made was bait, and Vivian took it eagerly, transmitting his secrets straight to his rival. Meanwhile, his team collected evidence, timestamps, data trails, copies of recordings she had stolen. Piece by piece, they built a case so strong it could crush her entire facade, and at the center of it all was Naomi, the unexpected guardian who had pulled the first thread. Jonathan invited her quietly into his confidence, not as an equal in status, but as the only person whose honesty had pierced the fog of betrayal. She listened, advised cautiously, and reminded him of one thing he nearly forgot in his thirst for vengeance: his humanity. Every public outing with Vivian became torture. Cameras flashed, magazines praised their impending wedding, but behind Jonathan's controlled smile burned the knowledge of her treachery. He watched her laugh, watched her place a possessive hand on his chest, watched her play the role of devoted fiancée, and all he saw was a wolf draped in silk. Naomi saw it too. She saw Jonathan's jaw tighten, his hands curl into fists under the table at meetings when Vivian chimed in with rehearsed charm. And though she stayed silent, her presence became a silent anchor. The walls were closing in. Jonathan knew he couldn't wait much longer. To keep playing along was to risk more damage to his company, his life, his dignity. The stage was set. And so, Jonathan prepared the final act. A gala was approaching, one of the most glamorous events of the year, where all eyes would be on him and Vivian. To the world, it would look like another night of luxury. To Jonathan, it would be the battlefield. He would let Vivian shine one last time. Let her bask in the illusion of control. Then, when the cameras were rolling, when the crowd was watching, he would strip away her mask. Naomi, though reluctant, would be there too. Not as a player in the game, but as the witness who had uncovered the truth, the quiet force who had shifted the course of a billionaire's fate. Jonathan was no longer the man betrayed. He was the man waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and when that moment came, the world would see Vivian for what she truly was. The night of the gala glittered with opulence. Chandeliers dripped crystals that scattered light across the ballroom, violins swelled in the background, and every guest seemed dressed in their finest armor of wealth. Photographers lined the entrance, their flashes sparking like lightning as Jonathan Hale and Vivian stepped onto the crimson carpet. Vivian, radiant in a gown of shimmering silver, clung to Jonathan's arm with the confidence of a queen. She smiled at the cameras, waved to acquaintances, and whispered sweet nothings to Jonathan that never reached his ears. Inside, she believed the world belonged to her, but Jonathan's face told a different story. His jaw was sharp, his eyes cold, and though his lips formed the expected smile for the crowd, there was no warmth behind it. He had come prepared, not for celebration, but for war. As the gala unfolded, Jonathan played his role with the same precision he used in boardrooms. He shook hands, posed for photographs, made polite conversation with dignitaries. Vivian floated beside him, basking in the attention, utterly unaware that every step brought her closer to the trap. Across the room, Naomi stood quietly near the back. Almost blending in with the waitstaff, though, she wore a modest evening dress Jonathan had insisted she accept. She didn't belong to this glittering world, and she knew it, but Jonathan had asked her to be there, and she couldn't refuse. Her heart pounded with the weight of the secret she carried. Jonathan caught her eye once during the evening, a fleeting look that spoke volumes. Stay steady. The moment is coming. Dinner was served, and as guests settled around the grand table, Jonathan stood to make his customary toast. He lifted his glass, commanding silence with the ease of a man used to being obeyed. "Tonight," he began, his voice smooth, "we celebrate more than business, more than success. We celebrate trust, the foundation on which every empire is built." Vivian's smile widened. She thought this was her moment. She imagined Jonathan announcing their engagement date, cementing her position before the world. She leaned toward him, squeezing his hand under the table. But Jonathan's words shifted like a blade. "Trust," he continued, "is fragile. And when it is broken, it shatters everything it touches." The room grew tense. Conversations hushed, forks stilled. All eyes were on Jonathan. He set down his glass and signaled toward a large screen positioned at the edge of the ballroom under the guise of a presentation. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. At first, guests assumed they were watching a corporate reel, perhaps highlights of Hale Industries' achievements. But within seconds, it became clear this was no ordinary presentation. The footage showed Jonathan in his office, unaware of being filmed. He was mid-conversation, discussing sensitive negotiations, his private words captured in crisp clarity. A ripple of shock surged through the crowd. Murmurs erupted. "Who recorded this? How is this possible?" Jonathan's voice cut through the chaos. "These recordings were taken without my knowledge. Hidden cameras placed in my office, cameras meant to strip me of my privacy, my dignity, and my company's security." Gasps filled the room. Vivian's smile faltered. Her hand slipped from Jonathan's as if burned. Jonathan stepped closer to her, his presence towering, his tone sharp as a knife. And while betrayal can come from rivals, it cuts deepest when it comes from within. He motioned again, and the screen shifted. This time the footage wasn't of Jonathan. It was of Vivian. Clips pieced together showed her entering his office late at night, her manicured hands near the vents, her laptop glowing as she transferred files. The evidence was irrefutable. The glamorous fiancée the world admired had been caught red-handed. The ballroom erupted in disbelief. Guests turned, eyes wide, whispering accusations. Cameras clicked furiously as reporters captured every second of the unfolding scandal. Vivian's face drained of color. She stammered, her perfect composure crumbling. "Jonathan, this isn't what it looks like." But Jonathan's voice thundered over hers. "It looks exactly like what it is. Treachery. You sold me out. To my enemies. To the very people who would see everything I've built destroyed." Vivian tried to rise, tried to salvage her dignity, but the spotlight pinned her like prey. "I did it for us," she lied desperately. "You've been so closed off, Jonathan." "I needed to protect what we had." Jonathan's laugh was bitter, hollow. "You didn't protect me. You exploited me." As Vivian floundered, Jonathan turned his gaze toward the back of the room. His eyes found Naomi, steady and unyielding. This, Jonathan declared to the stunned audience, would have remained hidden if not for someone who saw what I refused to see. Naomi froze as heads turned toward her.
She had never imagined being dragged into the spotlight of the elite.
But Jonathan's words were clear. He was acknowledging her, elevating her truth above Vivian's lies. She whispered the truth when I was blind. She saw the betrayal I ignored, and for that, I owe her my gratitude. The crowd buzzed, their whispers shifting from scandal to astonishment. Who was this woman? This quiet figure who had unmasked a deception that 20 of Jonathan's closest allies had missed. Naomi's cheeks burned, but she didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her presence speaking louder than any words could. Vivian's mask shattered completely. Her charm evaporated under the glare of exposure. She turned on Jonathan, her voice rising with venom. "You'll regret this. You think you're untouchable, but without me." Jonathan cut her off with a single commanding gesture. Security moved forward, discreet yet firm, guiding Vivian out of the ballroom as she screamed protests. The once-admired fiancée, who had basked in the glow of power, was dragged out in disgrace, her reputation collapsing in real time. The audience watched, breathless as Jonathan remained standing tall, unshaken. When silence reclaimed the room, Jonathan faced his guests once more. His voice was calm now, almost solemn. "Let this night be a reminder," he said. "Wealth, power, appearances, none of it means anything without trust. Betrayal is the poison that destroys empires, but truth, no matter how quiet, will always reveal itself." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. The gala ended not with celebration, but with revelation. Reporters swarmed, headlines were already being drafted, and the story of Jonathan Hale's betrayed engagement would dominate every paper by morning. But for Jonathan, it wasn't just a scandal. It was liberation. The mask had been ripped away, the enemy exposed, and though his heart bore the scars of betrayal, he was free from the shadows that had haunted him. And as he glanced once more at Naomi, standing steady amid the chaos, he knew that sometimes the most powerful voices were not the loudest, but the whispers that dared to speak the truth. The echoes of the gala lingered long after the chandeliers dimmed. What had begun as a night of celebration became a spectacle of scandal, one that spread across every news outlet before dawn. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire exposes fiancée's betrayal on camera," and Vivian Cross caught in corporate espionage. For the public, it was sensational gossip. For Jonathan Hale, it was both an ending and a beginning. The days after, in the days that followed, Jonathan's life shifted dramatically. Vivian vanished from the social scene, her face plastered on tabloids, but her voice absent from interviews. The world that once admired her beauty now tore her apart with speculation and ridicule. Lawsuits followed. Jonathan's legal team moved swiftly, pressing charges for corporate theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Vivian's allies, those who had fawned over her charm at parties and whispered about her influence, deserted her. In high society, loyalty was as fragile as glass. Once cracked, it shattered beyond repair. For Jonathan, however, the betrayal left deeper scars. Behind the walls of his penthouse, where city lights spilled across marble floors, he felt the weight of every choice he had made. He replayed moments in his mind, the dinners with Vivian where he ignored her disinterest, the red flags he dismissed as paranoia, the blind trust he mistook for love. Wealth had insulated him from many hardships, but it could not shield him from the sting of deception. He realized how dangerous it was to live in illusions. While Vivian's world collapsed, Naomi's life took a turn she never anticipated. Once invisible in the background of Hale Industries, she became the subject of quiet whispers and cautious respect. Colleagues who had barely noticed her now looked at her with awe, some even envy. She had been the one who uncovered the truth, the one who saved Jonathan Hale from ruin. But Naomi remained humble. She continued her work with the same diligence, refusing to let sudden recognition corrupt her character. When Jonathan called her into his office a week after the gala, she entered nervously, unsure what to expect. His office was no longer a place of suspicion. It had been swept, secured, and restored. Yet the memory of betrayal still hung faintly in the air. Jonathan stood by the window, gazing at the skyline, his reflection fractured in the glass. "You changed everything," he said quietly, without turning. Naomi shifted uncomfortably. "I only told the truth, sir. Anyone would have—" "No," Jonathan interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. "Not anyone. Most would have stayed silent. Most did stay silent. But you—" He paused, his voice steady. "You spoke when it mattered." It was the first time Naomi realized that her courage had not just saved Jonathan's empire, but his sense of himself. Months later, Vivian was dragged into court. Her silver gowns replaced by somber suits. She fought desperately, denying involvement, blaming unnamed conspirators, even painting herself as a victim of Jonathan's power. But the recordings were irrefutable. Camera after camera displayed her betrayal. Each image chipped away at the remnants of her credibility. The courtroom became a theater of her downfall. Once admiring reporters now described her as calculating, cold, and shameless. The very spotlight she once adored became the fire that consumed her. Jonathan attended each session, his expression unreadable, his posture unyielding. Beside him, Naomi often sat quietly, a grounding presence amid the storm. She didn't seek attention. She was simply there, steady and watchful, reminding him of the truth that had saved him. When the verdict was delivered, guilty on multiple counts, Vivian's face crumpled. The woman who once believed she could bend the world to her will was led away in handcuffs, her future defined not by glittering galas, but by prison walls. For Jonathan, victory wasn't sweet. It was sobering. The empire was intact, his fortune untouched, but his heart bore the bruise of betrayal. He realized that while money could rebuild walls, it couldn't rebuild trust. Not easily, not quickly. He began to change, not in public, where cameras still chased his every move, but in private. He grew quieter, more deliberate. He spent less time at parties, and more time among those who valued honesty over appearances. Slowly, he dismantled the illusions that had once blinded him, and in that process, he found himself relying more on Naomi. She didn't flatter him, didn't treat him as untouchable. She spoke truth, even when it was uncomfortable. For a man who had been betrayed by beauty and charm, Naomi's simplicity was a lifeline. Jonathan offered Naomi a promotion, one that would place her directly under his leadership. At first she hesitated, fearing she'd be seen as climbing on scandal, as someone who benefited from betrayal. But Jonathan assured her, "You earned this. Not because of what you exposed, but because of who you are." Naomi accepted, and as months turned to years, her influence grew, not through power plays or manipulation, but through integrity. Her presence reminded Jonathan daily of the lesson betrayal had taught him. That trust, once broken, could never be bought back with wealth, only rebuilt through truth. The scandal eventually faded from headlines, replaced by fresher stories of wealth and scandal. But within the circles of power, people remembered. They remembered the billionaire who unmasked his fiancée in front of the world, and the young black woman whose quiet courage exposed the lie. For Jonathan, that memory became a compass. Whenever he faced decisions clouded by appearances, he asked himself, "Am I seeing the truth, or am I clinging to an illusion?" For Naomi, the experience became a testament to the power of speaking up. She had once been invisible, her voice dismissed, but with a whisper, she changed the course of an empire. The story of Jonathan, Vivian, and Naomi was more than a scandal. It was a lesson etched into the fabric of their lives. It reminded everyone who witnessed it, whether in a glittering ballroom or through the headlines, that betrayal can wear a beautiful face, and truth can come from the most unexpected places. The billionaire learned that loyalty is priceless, and the assistant discovered that her courage had weight in a world that often overlooked her. And so, when the city lights glimmered on the skyline, and Jonathan stood once more in his office, free from hidden cameras, free from Vivian's shadow, he remembered the words that had saved him. "There's a camera in your office," a whisper, a warning, a truth that had exposed everything.